We are made of atoms, and we react to electromagnetic fields.
It takes roughly 15 to 20 years for tumors to develop. Cell phones are shortening that to 10 years.
You cannot reverse it, you cannot heal it, and brain tumors are very difficult to treat. So we need to look at prevention, and prevention is not to be exposed.
I would predict that the cancer you're going to see elevated in children is going to be leukemia.
We would never mandate spraying of DDT in classrooms, children to ingest lead, and yet we're talking about 2B carcinogens. When the FCC standards were adopted for thermal effects, we didn't have all of these wireless devices.
The wireless industry spends $100 million a year lobbying the Congress. They have very good access to the FCC, so it's really hard to go up against the economic and political power of this industry, even when you have the facts on your side.
It's very hard to find truly unpolluted advice.
I think zapped is a great word to describe what happens to the human body. You know, you may not hear it, feel it, smell it overtly, but your body does.
With the advent of the mobile phone in the 1980s, came the need to build a network of antennas to support them. Since then, the telecom companies have erected over 5 million mobile phone masts around the world. But incredibly, prior to filling the air with microwave frequencies, they didn't conduct a single piece of research to ensure there wouldn't be any long-term health effects from such exposure.
5 of us all diagnosed at once, within 6 months of each other, with breast cancer.
There were only 18 houses in the village surrounding the phone mast, so Eileen decided to conduct a survey to see if anybody else had suddenly started suffering ill health.
What came back really frightened us. Lots of people were reporting the same symptoms that I've been suffering with for years.
So vertigo?
Yeah, the headaches, the vertigo. But there was other young women in the village who were having fertility problems and pre-cancer cervical cells. We'd done a count of 77 people in the houses.
And out of 77 people, how many people were suffering biological effects?
The estimate was around 70%. People
70% of people
who'd had effects over the years with biological effects, sleep problems, skin rashes, benign lumps or cancer.
You know, melatonin is a hormone, and believe it or not, it's made in the brain, and it secretes only at night, and it's at night that we need it because that's when we go to sleep and when our brain repairs the cells of our body.
The hypothesis that the pineal gland cannot distinguish between light frequencies and man-made frequencies is certainly backed up by a wealth of research.
Wargaming reveals this leaked Motorola email is industry-paid studies purely for reassuring the public. We invited the powerful industry lobby CTIA to discuss the issues raised in this report. They sent this one-line refusal.
Thank you for contacting us, but we will not be able to do this interview.
The industry's most respected journalist is Dr. Louis Slessin, editor of Microwave News since 1981. Louis, great to speak to you. There seems to be a parallel universe, what the industry says and everyone else.
The whole system is broken. People are not being told the truth.
Who is it that sets the standards?
A group of people from a committee called ICNIRP.
The people who do the work on mobile phones are, by and large, engineers. They have no idea what is going on inside a living cell, but they are pontificating on this. They make the assumption that the only thing that can affect the well-being of a living organism is if it is powerful enough to heat the tissue.
But some of the world's leading scientists and industry insiders are breaking ranks to warn us of the risks.
We've gone from the equivalent of the horse and buggy to the jet in about 10 years. The transformation in technology has been without precedent, concerned about.
When US cancer epidemiologist Dr. Deborah Davis was first told about the risks of mobile phones, her reaction was predictable disbelief.
I said, "What are you talking about? There's no problem. If there were a problem, I would know about it." Because, of course, I was working at the National Academy of Sciences. I was working at the Cancer Institute, professor of epidemiology at the University of Pittsburgh. And I frankly thought, there's nothing to this. Then, however, I began to look. And the more I looked, the more concerned I became.
Dr. Davis has had a distinguished career as a presidential appointee for the Clinton administration and is recognised internationally for her work on environmental, health and disease prevention. She was recently in Australia holding a series of public seminars.
People are assuming everything's fine until we have evidence that we're in the middle of a disaster.
Electromagnetic radiation is everywhere. We have always been exposed to natural sources like the sun, but there are some sources of radiation that are man-made. Today, with the proliferation of mobile and wireless technology and devices that emit artificial radio frequency radiation, some claim we're exposed to levels up to a quintillion times higher than natural background levels. In Ontario is the former head of Microsoft Canada, Frank Clegg. He has gained valuable insight into the machinations of the tech industry.
I've been in the technology industry all my career, and I've seen the tremendous benefits that technology can provide. My concern is nobody can say that it's safe. All my industry and all government agencies say is there's no proof of harm. And to my mind, that's not the same as saying it's safe.
Mr. Clegg points out the safety standard only protects people from thermal damage that can occur through overheating. But scientists have demonstrated that radiation-emitting devices can cause DNA damage without heating tissue. These are non-thermal effects.
Unfortunately, the safety standards in North America and in Australia are based on this theory that's many decades old, that if tissue doesn't get heated, then it can't cause harm. And that's just out of date. And what the biologists tell us, and have shown in many, many experiments, and again, peer-reviewed published papers, that there is damage done at the DNA level, and from a biological standpoint, it's non-thermal radiation can cause and does cause harm to humans.
Powers. Several other countries around the world have maintained more stringent safety thresholds compared to Australia.
We know that China, Italy, and Switzerland, and Russia have standards 100 times safer than Canada's standards. And that's the same as Australia's standards. It gets some press coverage, but then it gets countered by industry. I am embarrassed to say that I believe my industry is on a campaign to bury the science and to confuse the message on the harmful effects of wireless devices.
Mr. Clegg is concerned there'll be a repeat of the mistakes from the past.
You never had a better cigarette.
One of the best analogies that I've heard in this scenario is using the tobacco model, where we know that the first science came out showing that smoking cigarettes caused harm back in the 1960s. And the tobacco industry was able to delay legislation, delay the message to the public for decades.
Craven Filter, the clean cigarette.
I believe that my industry is using that same model and just in obfuscating the science, hiring scientists to cast doubt on the science, confusing government and causing government to be constipated and not passing the legislation that they need to pass.
But when we approached the industry body, they objected to the criticism.
With over 3.5 billion cell phone subscribers on the face of the earth, that translates into billions upon billions of dollars in revenue. But there are some hidden charges as well. With tens of thousands of antennas built up to support the growing number of users, this is the price we're all forced to pay.
If somebody lives near a cell tower, there is a constant radio frequency signal that's coming out of that. It will boost higher when somebody is calling for that system to function.
The question marks arose very early. Already in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of question marks whether this was good to irradiate the whole population 24 hours around the clock and wherever you are actually.
The problem is we place antennas in the center of residential areas, we place them on schools, we place them in busy downtown settings where hundreds and thousands of people are exposed. You can't avoid it.
You are basically not safe anywhere. And soon there is no controlled population left because everybody's reached by the waves. This is the world's largest biological experiment ever.
There are probably about 13 studies that have found DNA breaks, both double and single-strand DNA breaks, with cell phone frequencies. Now, single-strand DNA breaks are known to repair themselves. A lot of things break DNA. Air pollution breaks DNA. Any number of things will. But double-strand DNA breaks are thought not to repair themselves, and that can lead to genetic mutations.
The assumptions behind the standards that exist are simply wrong. They're not set by health professionals, they're set by physicists and engineer types, and they are ignoring the evidence for human health.
You should know that who wrote the standards, which is the Motorola's, the Nokias of the world, the military who have their own interests in all this. They have no interest in lowering the standard. They want to keep it as high as they can.
We bought this place 2 years ago and spent a year renovating it. And then when we moved in, within, a couple of weeks, I started getting terrible headaches. And we thought it had been maybe miswired. So it took us a while to bring in an environmental engineer from the West Coast. And he came back and he said, it's wired perfectly, but the problem is the cell antenna's outside your window and off the roof decks.
In fact, when he spent the night here, and he went inside a tent to get through the night. A electromagnetic wave reflecting tent. And of course, we sleep under tents now.
It's getting to be a whole body of literature that is demonstrating changes in behavior, changes in ability to learn and remember. Some studies are now showing that people that spend a long time on a cell phone aren't as alert and bright after they get off the cell phone as they were before.
When we talk about people with a functional impairment, electrohypersensitivity, we really talk about anyone. It doesn't seem to be any specific profile. There has been calculations country by country, and it boils down to somewhere between 2 to 6% of the general population. Just in a country like United States, it would be in the order of 10 to 15 million people that would be electrohypersensitive.
I get very ill if someone has forgotten to put off his mobile phone when they visit me. After a couple of hours I feel ill, after 4 hours I can't speak anymore.
What we need to do is listen to the people that are saying things like, my health is crashing, I can't live here anymore. Need to listen to them and believe them, because these are our canaries in a coal mine.
You can translate the information that you collect from rats being exposed to the mobile phones into a knowledge about what happens at a longer distance. And we have shown that animals who have been exposed for 2 hours to the radio frequency of a mobile phone, both at 28 days afterwards and 50 days afterwards, there are damaged nerve cells in up to 2% of the tissue, both in the region where we keep our memory function and also in the layer of the brain with which we think.
You can clearly see that from a number of studies that has used low levels, mimicking what you get right now while we do this interview from the cellular towers. And you see there are a lot of dramatic effects on biological systems. We talk about 24/7, around-the-clock exposure, wherever you are, and your whole body. You never get away from it. And it seems from our studies that maybe your immune system can cope with for a time, but it will deteriorate, and then the irradiation will definitely damage cells at a deeper level. And the question is, what will then happen? And for us, the big question marks are effects, for instance, on the immune system, on the DNA, on short-term memory, concentration capacity, sleep quality. And the question is, of course, as you say, we don't see people falling dead on the street. But for instance, here in Sweden, more than 1/3 of people report heavy problems with their nighttime sleep. And sleep is one of these subjective areas which definitely various forms of electromagnetic fields will have an impact on.
We are seeing increases in brain tumors. We're seeing increases in Alzheimer's. We're seeing increases in all of the neurotransmitter diseases, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, Parkinson's. These are all disease systems that are known to be associated with low-level energy exposures.
This is a very serious issue of which we don't have the answers, and we're not doing anything about it, not even studying it. In the United States today, there is not one study going on. Zero.
It's impossible to get any funding, which is odd, and I don't have any clear-cut answer. You have to ask politicians, funding organizations, the industry and so on, why they don't want scientists like myself to really prove it's safe. Because they say it's safe, but it's not safe to study it.
In my judgment, we are sitting on a ticking bomb, and we're not doing what we should do to advise people on ways that they can reduce their exposure, to tell them that they should reduce their exposure, that they should just be aware of this threat. My job as a public health official is to do what I can to prevent disease, not wait till people develop their brain tumor and then find ways of treating it. And I think that the evidence at present calls for an active, urgent message to the public, to the politicians, to the companies, that we must find ways of reducing exposure to radio frequency fields.
Everybody needs this mobile so much. It's such a beloved thing. It's so useful. I used to say it saves so many people's lives in earthquakes and in crimes and wherever. So it saves so many lives. And so far, we don't know how many lives were taken.
This followed 14 years of objection to masts in the neighborhood and the removal of a hidden illegal mast erected in the 1990s.
There was extensive media coverage of the event, connecting us with other communities nationwide.
Stand with every community that believes they have the right to choose their preferred method of connection, and call on the cell phone industry to invest in more responsible solutions for a democratic and sustainable future.
I don't know the exact number, but probably something like 40,000 to South Africa, and clearly probably hundreds or millions worldwide. And there has been many studies done. There's been no concrete evidence that there is a problem with radiation.
There are several empirical studies, peer-reviewed, that raise exactly the concerns that the Craigavon community are raising.
And there are many more studies that say that no correlation can be found.
Look, we can play this ping-pong. Exactly. I can say this study, you can say that study.
I've got slightly more studies than you.
But the bottom line is, there is enough information to raise the concern.
I started experiencing symptoms that I've never experienced before.
All my body is itchy and it's burning. I'm scratching. I can't even sleep.
Itchy skin, bloodshot eyes, headaches, inability to concentrate. I'd get an inflamed sensation down the one side of my body.
Like hot flushes, headaches and, all those things.
I haven't really been able to sleep properly.
My stomach is burning inside. I feel like I can vomit. And I've got a headache.
Can I prove that the symptoms are a direct result of the tower going up? No, I can't. Does it correspond with the exact same time I started working from home? Did the symptoms get worse at that time? Yes, they did. And I'm not going to gamble with that factor. There's a book called Would You Stick Your Head in the Microwave Oven? And that about sums it up for me.